Hi everyone, I wanted to talk to you today about the writing process. While the book covers multiple chapters over the writing process, what I want to do is condense it down and discuss the parts of the writing process that I feel are the most important for this class. We're going to complete quite a few papers together, so this is something that's very important for you to think about. So first of all, here are the 5 steps that we're going to discuss. And what I'm going to do is go through and break each of these steps down. Hopefully give you some hints that help make this class a little bit easier for you and help you improve your writing process. So before you ever sit down to actually start writing, once you receive a writing assignment, there are 4 things you need to consider. The first one is purpose. Why am I writing? So are you writing to inform? Are you writing to persuade? Are you writing to entertain? And some of that depends on the topic that you're given or the type of paper that you're being asked to write. So you always have to make sure you understand what is the purpose of writing this paper. Second, to whom am I writing the paper? Writing a paper to your peers is different than writing a paper for a professor or writing something that you're planning on publishing. So who is my reader is another very important question to answer before you get started. Third, what kind of tone do I want to take? Do you want to sound educated? Do you want to sound funny? Do you want to sound serious? Because that determines the details that you include as well as the vocabulary that you choose. And finally, what point of view should you write this from? If we do something like a narrative, which we will do, many times that is first person point of view. So first person means I use I, okay, and so that's a very common point of view that we use when we write. However, when we're talking about things like research, then we use third person point of view. So we don't use I, we use he and she, and we take ourselves out of it. So you have to consider what point of view is appropriate for the type of writing I'm doing. If it's very informal, then using that first person I is okay. However, for quite a few of the papers that we will do, you will want to avoid the use of I outside of the narrative especially. And especially when we talk about the research paper, you do not write research in first person point of view. So we'll use a lot more he and she and they when we're writing those papers. You also need to consider what is the length of the assignment, what kind of requirements are included with this assignment. Maybe do you need to have research? Does it need to be a specific type of paper? Am I answering a specific set of questions? So your topic needs to be very narrow. One of the struggles that I see my students have is not that they choose too narrow of a topic, is that their topic is way too broad. So they struggle to come up with specific details because the topic is too big. They're trying to do too much. So keep your topics very, very specific, and you'll have a much easier time writing a paper because then you can come up with specific examples. You have very clear points. So keep that in mind. Anytime you can be more specific in your paper, that's what you want to do. And then finally, when is it due? If it needs to be done in 2 days, do you have a lot of time to do a lot of research? So that also will determine what kind of topic you want to be doing, because if it's something you don't know a lot about and you need to do research, do you have time to do that and get it done by the due date? So that also will determine the topic that you're going to choose for your paper. All right, so how do you find a topic? This is probably the greatest struggle I see for my students, is trying to decide what to write. So first of all, are you given a topic? Many times in academic writing, you're writing for a purpose that you're given, and you're given the topic. So the question there really is, do you understand the topic you've been given? And what is it you already know about this topic, and what is it you need to know still to write this paper? You can collaborate with others. Maybe ask other people, what are you writing about? Do you have any ideas? Even family members are good people to bounce ideas off of. So if you need help, always look to other people. Sometimes they can give you some good ideas. Also, what type of writing does this have to be? You know, a narrative lends itself to a certain type of writing or to a certain topic that you may want to use. But if you're really struggling, really these two questions I think are the most valuable to help you find a topic. What interests me? What is it that I enjoy talking about just with friends and family? What is it that I am interested in? Write about those things. Or if you're really struggling there, what's happening in the world? Anything current events is always an excellent topic to write about. It matters. We care about those things. And hopefully you're somewhat interested in the things that are happening in the world. So there are some ideas for you. I will always give you some topic ideas with each paper, so don't fret if you're really struggling. I will help you, and the textbook does that as well. So we will help you find some topics. Okay, so here's just the thing I want you to understand about pre-writing in general. A lot of you probably don't like to pre-write. A lot of you loathe the idea of pre-writing, and that's okay. But here's what you need to understand. The longer the paper, the more time you should spend planning. The more time you should spend choosing a solid topic, doing any kind of research, or gathering information that you need to do. Because it is easier to change your topic than to get halfway through writing the paper and realize you don't have anything else left to say. So it is much easier to change the process than it is to change the product. So if you're writing a longer paper, you need to spend more time doing this, really thinking about an appropriate topic and then the points that you plan to use under that. If you're writing a very short paper and you choose a topic you decide you don't like, you can deal with it for 2 pages. You'll be okay. But obviously for an 8-page research paper, you want to spend that extra time pre-writing so that the product turns out well. So just something to think about. Okay, then you need to come up with ideas. What am I going to say once I come up with a topic? So once you've done that pre-writing and you've chosen a topic to write about, then you need to generate some ideas. What am I going to say about this topic? So there are a couple of different ways to go about that. The first one is free writing, which I love. Essentially, the idea of free writing is you say, okay, I'm going to write about running. I love using the example of running. I'm a runner. And so, maybe I just write all the things I can think about running that are going through my mind. And so I just write. And I give myself a set amount of time, maybe 3 minutes, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10. And I just write whatever comes to my mind about that specific topic. And that allows me to then see what's already in my mind, what I already know about this, and then hopefully from there I can find some ideas to then use for my paper. Looping is kind of like that. Once I have a couple of ideas, then I free write on those ideas. So sort of once I've really done some real free writing, looping then gives me a more directed free writing to help me then come up with supporting details that I want to include. You can list what are some of the things I know about running, and I list out some of those things, and then I can look at them and say, yeah, I like this idea. No, I don't like this one, and I can cross it out. Brainstorming, sometimes we do that just by writing down whatever we think of. Sometimes that looks like a list. Sometimes it's just asking questions. Clustering or webbing, this is one you're probably familiar with. And now it's gonna, here we go. Let me draw this for you. This is the one we are usually pretty familiar with. Sorry, 1 second. It's gonna have to, apparently it's not gonna let me do it. Anyway, with webbing, what we're used to seeing there is you draw the circle and you write your word in there, and then you draw lines off of that with ideas from that. So I would write running in the circle, and then I would off of that draw lines and come up with things that I know about running. I can ask the W's, that is the who, what, when, where, why questions, and hopefully generate some ideas that way. And sometimes just keeping a journal and writing down things whenever you think of them. I'll tell you, in my phone, I have, in my iPhone, I have a note that's just writing ideas. And when I think of something, I just throw it in there. And then when I sit down to write, I have all this great material that I've already gathered. So there's some ideas for you when you're trying to figure out, okay, once I've decided on a topic, what am I going to say about that topic? So then we need to talk about organizing and drafting. Of course, we need to talk about your thesis. And the thing I find for students is that writing a thesis for them can be a real struggle. It is the most important sentence in your paper because it says, this is the point I'm making. If you get nothing else out of my paper, please understand my thesis. Okay? So to write a thesis, first of all, you have to know what your topic is going to be and what you're going to say about that topic. Before you can do that, before you can make that thesis, you have to have already decided that. Okay? And so the thesis then includes your point of view or attitude about your subject. So it's not just, I'm going to write about running. That is not a thesis. Okay, that is not a good thesis for a paper because it doesn't include any kind of point of view or attitude about what I'm writing about. Maybe if I say something like, running is the best use of your time for burning calories. Now I have a point of view or attitude that I'm showing or explaining or proving about my particular topic. Okay, so we need to have more than just, I'm going to write about running. That's not a thesis. Typically, the thesis goes in the very middle or end of the introduction after you give whatever background information you're giving. Most of the time, your thesis should be the very last sentence of your introduction, because the idea of the introduction is, here's some background information, then you give your thesis, then you move into the body where you then actually give us the information. Okay? It should be one sentence. It should have a so what. So my example, my so what is, running is the best option for burning calories in a set amount of time that most people can do. There are a couple of others, but they're very uncommon sports. So that would be a basic thesis that I would use. Okay. And I'm trying to, there we go. Okay. It was not letting me sketch, but now I can see that. Okay, so here are some things I don't want you to do in a thesis statement. First of all, do not make highly opinionated statements. So something like, people who don't run are lazy. That's not a thesis statement. That's just an opinion that I threw out there, and it alienates most of my readers. So that's not something you want to do. Don't make announcements. This essay will discuss. I will be writing. The paper should not talk about itself. That's weird. And you shouldn't discuss yourself in a thesis. You shouldn't have I in a thesis, so don't do those things. Okay? Don't make factual statements. Many businesses pollute the environment. Okay, what are you proving there? What is the attitude or point that you're making? This is more like a fact, more like a supporting detail. So don't include supporting details. Those aren't thesis statements. Okay? And don't make them too broad. Just like I told you before, where you need to have a really narrow topic, you need to have a very specific thesis statement. So you don't want to have something like, nowadays high school education is meaningless. Well, that's incredibly broad and doesn't say a whole lot. On the other hand, high school diplomas have been devalued by grade inflation, says, here is my topic and then what I'm going to say about it. Okay, so make sure that it's very specific. Notice that my example one includes all my key terms. So high school diplomas, grade inflation, it doesn't have any pronouns. So no he's, she's, it's, they's, or I's. It doesn't make any kind of announcement. It just says the point that I'm going to make. So remember, a thesis needs to say what you plan to prove or explain. It shouldn't be a factual statement. It should say, this is what I hope you understand when you get to the end of my paper. All right, so then once you have decided on a topic and you have a general idea of some of the points you're going to make, and maybe you have a thesis. Now, there's one thing I want to still say about thesis statements. You may not be ready to write a thesis statement yet. Sometimes I'm not ready to write a thesis statement until after I write the paper because I don't know where I'm going until I get there. A thesis statement is very valuable because it does give you focus as the writer. But sometimes I'm just not really sure where I'm going to go yet, and so I'm not ready to write a thesis statement. If that's the case, it's okay. I'll never know anyway, but just don't forget to put one, okay? Then you have to decide how am I going to develop this? So in what order am I going to put my points? How am I going to arrange them? What kind of specific details do I also need to include? Well, that depends on the patterns of development, sometimes called the rhetorical modes, sometimes called the type of writing. We give it a lot of different names. Typically, I will give you these. In fact, these are the patterns of development that this class will use. So the way I structure this class is each week we will cover one of these patterns of development. Okay, so here is where the extra credit comes in. If you're interested in extra credit from this class, you actually have to start it at the very beginning. You're going to have to work for it. But here's your extra credit opportunity. You can see that these are the different papers we are going to write. I challenge you as a student in English 101 to write every paper on the same topic. That's right. Every paper on the same topic. Now, it has to be a specific topic. It can't just be music. That's too broad. Maybe a specific band, maybe a specific genre. My daughter happens to love Irish music. She's 5, and her favorite band is the High Kings. So maybe she decides she wants to write about the High Kings. For me, maybe I talk about running half marathons. So not even just running, but something a little more specific to running. Could be maybe a potential, what I call challenge topic. So if you're interested, I strongly suggest that you choose a topic to do all semester. Now, that does include the research paper because argumentation persuasion is the last paper. That's the research paper. The one paper this will not apply to is description because we do something a little different with that. But every paper, narration through argument, that is through the research paper, you will have to do on the same topic to complete the challenge. Now, why is it that I ask you to do that? Because I feel like you really understand how the types of writing are different or the patterns are different if your topic doesn't change. So I feel like you really get to see the difference between these different types of writing and where you would use them in your academic career. So that's why I do it as a teacher. Also, it helps you have a topic because you don't have to sit and think, what am I going to write about? Because you've already decided at the beginning of the semester. So as a teacher, I find those benefits. As a student, why would you want to do this? Well, besides the fact that then you have a built-in topic, so it makes the writing easier. I will award 25 bonus points to any student who completes the challenge. And that's quite a bit for this class. So if you're interested in that, it is worth 25 extra credit points. And to be honest, this really is the only extra credit that I offer in this class. So you'll need to decide within the next couple of weeks if you'd like to take me up on that. Now there are a couple of rules. First of all, I reserve the right to tell you that this challenge topic is not working and you probably should just leave it. Second, you can decide that this topic just isn't working and I just don't want to write about this anymore. That is perfectly fine. There is no penalty for dropping out of the challenge. You just don't earn the 25 bonus points, okay? But please know that I reserve the right at some point to tell you, I don't think this topic is working. I think you're just going to have to write about something else, okay? So I do reserve that right. If you're interested in doing the challenge, please email me. It's stephaniewitcher@crowder.edu and let me know what your challenge topic is, and I will tell you yay or nay or kind of help you find a topic if you're struggling to figure out one. All right, so really quickly, I want to make sure that we all understand this. These are the major parts of an essay. The first paragraph typically is the introduction. Now, sometimes it's multiple paragraphs if you're writing a really long paper. At the end of that introduction will be the thesis statement. Then in the body, these are the body paragraphs. This is where the paper really is. So this is where I make my points and I support those points. So in my body paragraphs, I'm looking for a couple of things. First of all, I'm looking for transitions that show a connection between the paragraph before and the paragraph I'm now writing. So as the writer, it's your job to show us, as the readers of your paper, why you have put these body paragraphs in this order. How are they related to each other? Okay, then you also need a topic sentence. This is the first sentence of your body paragraph, and it should tell us this is what the paragraph is about. It should be essentially the main idea of that paragraph. It should not include I or anything like that. And once we get to the research paper, it should not include research. And then after that should be all of your supporting details. Okay, so then once you've given me that main idea, then all the sentences under that should then give me support or more examples to prove your point. And then finally, the last paragraph or the last section of the paper is the conclusion. And this is where you wrap it up, make your point one last time, maybe reiterate the thesis statement, and what you do not want to do in a conclusion is give new information. Okay, never want to do that in a conclusion. You just want to wrap it up, put a nice bow on it. Okay, so let's talk about some of those parts. The big one I want to make sure we talk about are supporting details. That is every sentence after the first sentence in each body paragraph. This is where you give your evidence or you prove the point you're making in that main idea. So just a couple things. It needs to be specific. You need very specific terms. So please don't tell me that it was a pretty day. Be specific. What made it pretty? Maybe it was 74 degrees outside and there was a very slight breeze and the birds were chirping. This is much more specific. By the way, it also makes your paper longer, so that's helpful too. Your evidence should be very dramatic. So don't tell us that 2 out of 5 dentists agree, because that's not very dramatic or convincing to anyone. Your evidence needs to be accurate. Don't make it up. If you don't know, go find out. If you need to do some research, that's fine. If you borrow information, please make sure that you document it. Now, in this class, I'm not worried about it too much. You can give me the web page or the website where you found the information for now. I don't worry about it too much until we get to the research paper. But if you borrow information, please make sure you indicate somehow that you have borrowed this information from a source. All right? Okay, so then when you're ready to write the draft, so you've decided on a topic that matches your audience purpose, tone, and point of view, and the assignment, and you've chosen, this is, I think, the key points I'm going to make about this topic, and you've made sure that you understand your pattern of development, and you've considered a thesis statement, then it's actually time to sit down and write the paper. Now, there's something that I want you to understand when you're writing the first draft of your paper. We don't all write the same. Some of us write very differently from each other. And you've probably noticed this through your educational career, but maybe nobody's really talked to you about this. So here's what I want you to understand. There's a continuum of writers. On one end of the spectrum is the sprinter. This is the person who just sits down and writes. He or she works very quickly, does very little editing, just sort of pounds it out. And at the end of the day, he or she has a paper. I say he because these tend to be boys. Not always. So at the end, you have a paper. The problem with the sprinter is they're not very good at editing because they're so concerned about just getting the paper done. So typically, while they have good content and they'll have their paper done, it needs a lot of work. On the very opposite end of the spectrum is the bleeder. And the thing with the bleeder you have to understand is we call them a bleeder for a reason. Every word costs this writer blood, sweat, tears. Because what this writer does is will write 2 or 3 words, delete, 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 write a couple of sentences, delete, delete, delete. It is constant editing that is happening in the paper. So unlike the sprinter, getting a paper completed can take a long time. The difference, though, is by the time a bleeder is finally done with a paper, which could be 3 times as long as the sprinter, it is well done in that typically it is much more grammatically correct. Usually these students are very strong in grammar, and so things like that are almost perfect by the time the bleeder is done. What they need to work on typically is some content because they get so focused on the grammar that sometimes they lose that content in having good specific details. Whereas a sprinter a lot of times has great specific details, but the grammar is really, really lacking. Okay, and then we have the person in the middle. Typically, this kind of person understands that they need to move forward with the paper and not too fast, not too slow. So that there's this tension that happens between creating good content and managing the content that they have created. So managing the text that they have created. That there needs to be, the good content, the specific details, but also that we need to stop and consider the grammar and the organization of the paper as well. Okay, and typically we fall somewhere in the spectrum of a plotter sprinter or a plotter bleeder. All right, so please understand which one you are, because if you are a sprinter, you need to find someone to help you edit your papers. It's that simple. You probably have decent content, but your organization and your grammar are going to be atrocious if you're an extreme sprinter. If you're a plotter sprinter, just know that you still need to find someone to edit your papers and tell them that they really need to focus on those couple of things. If you're a bleeder, on the other hand, usually you don't need someone to edit for grammar and things like that. Usually what you need to have somebody look at is your content, and are there places where you could be more specific. So keep those things in mind. Either one, the sprinter or the bleeder, typically the extreme sprinter or the extreme bleeder, they tend to hate pre-writing. The sprinter because it slows them down, the bleeder because it also slows them down, and they already know the paper is going to take them so long. But both of you need to pre-write. Okay? So please understand where you fall on that continuum, understand what your weaknesses are, and work to those, because we have a lot of papers to write in this class. So if you're that sprinter, procrastination can work against you because then you don't have time to find somebody to help you edit. If you're a bleeder, procrastination works against you because that adds to your stress. So please think about that while you're working through this class. All right, if you're struggling to figure out how to get started, this is what I call blank page syndrome. Here are some things you can do. First of all, write the thesis at the top of the paper. The great thing is we don't live in the days of the typewriter anymore, so it's just a simple backspace or a copy paste, and we can move that thing wherever we want to later. So a lot of times the hardest part of getting started is just getting something down on paper. Just getting your fingers moving and getting that cursor moving, getting the ball rolling, as we say. So write that thesis at the top. If you don't have a thesis, start with your body paragraphs. That's perfectly fine. If you've done some decent pre-writing, you already know what those body paragraphs, or have a decent idea of what those body paragraphs are going to say. So start there. Okay? If you're still struggling, write your name and the heading at the top of the paper. Okay, really the key here is to get rid of the blank page, get your fingers moving, get your brain engaged. Once you do that, I think you'll find that things will start moving. Okay, please keep in mind that each of your body paragraphs need to have a topic sentence, and you also need to have transitions between your paragraphs. Be very, very specific about your support so that you show instead of tell. And we're going to spend some time talking about that with description as well. Use words that appeal to your senses. Okay, so we want to hear, and we want to see, and we want to feel, and we want to smell the experiences that you're sharing with us. So make sure that you use lots of sensory details. And of course, replace average words with more specific ones. Don't just tell me a lot. That's a terrible word. Don't tell me stuff. Don't tell me things. Those are incredibly average, boring words. Anything is better than those words. Okay? All right, so when you're considering how am I going to start this? If you're still struggling, I find most students struggle with the introduction. Some because it has the thesis statement in it, some because it's just hard to get started. So here are some ideas that you can include. Broad statement to narrow statement. So that is, maybe I just talk about exercise in general and how beneficial that is to you, and then work my way down to running. Or maybe I give an anecdote, so I tell you a story. Maybe I start out with crossing my very first finish line 3 years ago. Maybe give an idea of opposite of what you plan to speak on. So maybe I actually start out talking about how Americans are overweight. And one of the best ways to fix that is to go running. A series of short questions. This is one the book suggests, but I'll tell you I don't love this one. Give a quotation. In my example, maybe from a famous runner, maybe Meb Keflezighi or somebody like that. Those are excellent. By the way, if you use a quotation, that's perfectly fine. Just make sure you tell us who said it. Any sort of brief background information. What is it we need to know? Maybe you need to define a term or give us some historical background so that we understand your topic. Refute a common belief. Maybe most people believe something, and the point that you're going to present is that actually what your topic is more true. So refuting a common belief is good. And then a dramatic factor statistic. Of course, that requires a little bit of research, which is okay. You'll still have to document it. But it can be a really powerful way to get started. You can mix and match these. You could do 2 or 3 of them in an introduction to really flesh it out. But again, don't forget, at the end of that introduction needs to be your thesis statement. All right, then a conclusion. What can you put in there? Well, you can give us a summary. You can give us some kind of prediction. Where do you see this going? I'll tell you, in running, more people ran more miles last year than ever recorded before. So people are joining the movement. You can give us a quotation again, maybe from the same person you gave us in the introduction. That's good. Same with statistics. You can give us some kind of call for action. What is it you want us to do now that you've given us that information? And of course, leave your reader with your so what. Why does this matter? What are we supposed to learn? So if you see me write that on your paper, so what? You haven't told me why I should care. And the thing with the so what is, it can be that you learned a lesson. And in you learning a lesson, hopefully we as the reader also learn that lesson. And that's a great so what. Okay, and then finally, don't forget to give it a title. You should always give your paper a title. It should be in the middle center of the paper. It should be all the important words should be capitalized, but you do not put it in italics, in purple, in 24 size font, Times New Roman 12. Keep it very simple. Okay? Then, once you have done your first draft, I highly suggest that you walk away from it for a little bit. I have built this class so that we essentially work on 1 paper a week, which gives you time to do this if you don't procrastinate. So once you write that first draft, I suggest you walk away from it for a little bit. Brain research says that once you write a paper, it's stuck in your short-term memory for a while. If you walk away from it, what I call incubate, then that gives your brain time to decide this is not important information, and it can dump it. If you've ever written a paper and then edited the paper very shortly soon after and turned it in, and you got the paper back and you realized you missed all these silly little things that you never even saw, that's because you didn't incubate, because you didn't walk away from it. And so you missed all of those things that you thought were in the paper that weren't actually in the paper, or vice versa. So by walking away from it, it gives your brain time to dump that information, so then when you're ready for the next step, it's fresh. Okay, and it's not, you don't read what you think the paper says, you read what the paper actually says. Now, this is not procrastination. If you procrastinate on your assignment, you don't have time to do this step. All right, so then we need to work on fixing the paper, okay, because no paper is ever perfect. And so what can we do to make it better? Well, first we need to read over the paper to look for structure, appearance, and paragraph development. We're looking for the big picture. Does it flow well? Does it make sense that I put this sentence here? Does it make sense that I put this body paragraph before this one? Also, we're looking at tone and voice, and we'll talk more about that later. But you know, if I chose a particular tone, do I keep that throughout the whole work? Or do I sound like I have multiple personalities or something like that because I'm happy in one paragraph and angry in another? You want to maintain consistency and coherence throughout your whole paper. So this first step is just looking at the work as a whole. And one of the key things you want to consider is your weakest point should never go at the end. So if you have 3 body paragraphs, your weakest one should be the first, your strongest one should be the last. Okay, so consider that when you're organizing your paper. Some other things to consider. Do you have a clear title? Do you have a focused thesis? Do you have very solid background you give us in the introduction so we understand? Have you given us excellent, specific, strong support? And maybe that includes research. Does the writing flow? So does it make sense? Our eyes, our brains understand how you're moving from point to point. And that includes not only transitions at the beginning of your body paragraphs, but sometimes transitions inside of your body paragraphs as well. Okay, do all of your topic sentences match up with your thesis, or do you get off track? Okay, and then do you have sentence variety, or do you start every third sentence with I, or the, or a, or do you have a ton of simple sentences in a row? So you want to keep everything as far as your sentence length varied. All right, then we're going to look at some sentence level problems. Of course, is the tone consistent? Do I stay focused? And then, so are my specific details focused? But also, is the whole paragraph focused? I have written papers before when I realized this paragraph doesn't even fall under the topic I'm writing about. I kind of got off track here and I've had to delete it altogether. So you need to make sure that your paragraphs are focused on your thesis. It all has to fall under your thesis. Okay? And then, of course, you have a variety of sentences. Then look at word level issues. So this is, I didn't use jargon. You don't want to use cliches. Let me give you a couple of those. Jargon, first of all, is just words specific to a particular trade or group of people. You want to avoid using those. Avoid those cliches. You don't hang out with your friends in a paper, okay? Unless you're physically hanging from the monkey bars with your friends, that's a cliche. Avoid terms like kid. Kid is a baby goat. That's a slang term, okay? And so a lot of those slang terms fall under those cliches. Avoid those kinds of words. Make sure your figures of speech flow. If you want to use a simile or a metaphor, more power to you. I love those. But make sure they make sense. Use very strong verbs. Don't tell me she walked. Don't tell me she said. You can always make your verbs better. And by doing that, honestly, writing with good verbs is more descriptive than adding 10 adjectives. Okay, so keep those things in mind. You also want to remove vague words. There, a lot of times we don't need it. It is a huge one. I'm going to work these out. Do not use the word it in your paper. It doesn't tell us anything. The word that many times we can take out due to the fact. Just say because. I think, Lord willing, that is what is happening because you're writing. Writing is thinking on paper. So you don't have to tell us you think unless we're worried about that. We just kind of assume that that's what you're doing. Avoid the word you because we don't know who you is. When you use the word you, what you're doing is pointing the finger at your reader. So unless you're specifically talking to your reader, you do not want to use the word you. Okay? All right, then editing and proofreading is more about the grammar. All right, so revising is more about content, and that is more important. I care so much more that you have specific details than you have all your commas in the right place. So content is where it's at. Spend your time there. But you still do want to edit and proofread. So checking for spelling and punctuation, please watch your commas. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about commas this semester. Also some word level problems. Again, make sure you look over those. And then finally, change up the order of your words so that you're not using the same words over and over again. My strongest proofreading suggestion I have for you is to read the paper backwards. Start on the very last word, and the second to last word, and the third to last word. So you're reading from right to left rather than left to right, which is how we usually read. The idea here, again, comes from brain research. Our brains are made to make meaning. And so it will add words that actually aren't on your paper. It will remove words that are actually in your paper that shouldn't be because it's trying to make meaning. So by reading your paper backwards, it breaks the meaning. You can't make meaning out of it. And so that forces your eyes and your brain to really focus on one word at a time. By doing that, you'll find those misspelled words, you'll find those repeat words, things like that. So I highly suggest that as a final step. Okay, here's just some things I want you to understand about the drafting and editing proofreading part. You should have multiple drafts. In fact, the longer the paper, the more drafts you should have. For these, basic papers we're going to start with, you may have 2 or 3 drafts. That's fine. By the time we get to the long paper, you should have many, many drafts. All right. So the process repeats itself. It's not just a linear, well, I do this, and then I do this, and this, and this, and this. No, what you need to be doing is it's a circular process. Okay, so I need to draft again. Then I need to revise, edit, and proofread again. Then I'm going to draft again. Okay. Be sure to have more than one person look at your drafts. Have some people you can count on. In today's technological age, there's no reason you can't share it with somebody who lives somewhere else. Thanks to Google Docs and things like that, you can share your papers anywhere. So different people have different strengths. Find some really strong writers to help you. Be sure to downshift. This is something I write a lot. Anytime you can be more specific, your paper will be better for it. Don't waste words. Please don't be extra wordy. It doesn't earn you any points by throwing in extra words. Finally, watch for passive voice, and this is an example here. The ball was kicked by me. Well, what the problem with this particular sentence is there's no subject. And let me show you what I mean here. So, screen sketch. There we go. Okay, so the problem is our subject, which is usually right at the beginning, is ball. But that doesn't make any sense because the ball isn't doing the kicking. Who's doing the kicking? Well, I'm doing the kicking. But I is not the subject as it should be. Where it is it's now over here in this prepositional phrase and it's an object. That doesn't work. This is actually a fragment. So don't do this, okay? What this should say is, I kicked the ball. So be careful when you're doing that or when you're writing, especially short sentences. The way you can a lot of times tell if you have passive voice is you'll have one of these. You'll have a helping verb with a past tense verb. So be careful there. That is one of those little grammar rules that will get you sometimes. All right. So that's the writing process. I hope I haven't bored you to tears. I know this is thrilling material, but it's important material. So if you have any questions about that, let me know. Be thinking about your challenge topic. I'm happy to have some discussion with you about that. Feel free to email me if you need some help or want to pick my brain about it. Once you think you have a topic, shoot me an email, stephaniewitcher@crowder.edu, and let me know what you think your topic's going to be if you want to take on the challenge. All right, guys, I'll see you later. Bye.